Greetings fellow mammals, today we'll be going over all 4 DMRs in an order that makes sense to me, so use the chapters if you only care about a specific one. And with that out of the way, I want to quickly lay down some basic DMR knowledge. One of the main reasons DMRs can feel unfair at times comes down to the fact that they don't have scope glint like the sniper rifles. At all. Yes, you can use the SVK for example with a 10x scope and there won't even be a small shimmer. Nothing. Obviously that makes these things the perfect tool for counter sniping. And the next thing I want to point out is that from my testing, my gameplay experience as well as the data we finally have access to through sim.gg, link down below, all DMRs seem to be so accurate that you don't really need any attachments to reduce spread. And as you can see here, the spread increase is literally 0. So every single shot you take with a DMR is just like the first one. They never get more inaccurate. That means for all the builds we will be looking at today, we can completely ignore the blue lasers and the light barrels. They are pretty much all a complete waste of points for this weapon type, which I actually do not mind because that means we have a bigger budget. The final piece of information I wanted to share with you is that 3 out of 4 DMRs come with a 1.5x headshot multiplier by default instead of the usual 1.34, the LMR being the only exception to that rule. Unfortunately this gets even more confusing because they decided that the 1.75x multiplier, which is usually synthetic tip ammo, will be called hollow point ammo on these weapons. I guess they made that choice because it has the 20 point attachment cost hollow point ammo usually has, but then again wouldn't it be less confusing if synthetic tip was just a tad cheaper on these DMRs, but you keep the naming convention that's tied to the mechanic instead of breaking it just to keep the cost normal? I don't know, I don't necessarily agree with this decision, but I guess it doesn't really matter. That's it for the basic knowledge though. However, I also wanted to point out 2 more things for any developers watching. One is very clearly a bug and the other is, well, just irritating. Let me show you the bug first. When you use a bipod and a scope option that allows you to attach one of these switchable zoom levels to it, these 3 here, the one that has the 4x stops you from using the bipod. Here, just watch. I am now on the 10x zoom, I press the key, it deploys the bipod, I can zoom out, it is still deployed. But when I ADS again and then switch from the 10x to the 4x zoom, the bipod will undeploy itself. As you can see, I am no longer fixed to the ground. And when I ADS again and try to redeploy it, it won't let me. I have to return to the 10x zoom first and then it is possible to deploy it again. Of course I also tested the same scenario with the 2x and 3x options, other scopes and on multiple weapons, but it only ever happened with the 4x version, so clearly that one is bugged when it comes to deployable grip options, because this bug also applies to the grip pods, not just the basic bipod. And the other buggy little detail I wanted to quickly showcase is the 10x thermal scope on the M39 EMR. For comparison, you can see how it is supposed to look on the right and the EMR version on the left. It is completely blurry for no reason and in my opinion therefore unusable on that weapon. DICE, please fix both of these issues of course. Thank you. And now with this baseline of information in mind, why don't we start off with the aforementioned EMR. This weapon sucks. Yeah, I just wanted to save you some time. We will go over the stats and stuff of course, but it sucks. I do not recommend using this. We have a damage model here that looks redundant at first, but starts to make sense when we look at the headshots later, so bear with me. It starts out at 40 damage up to 21 meters, then 37.5 up to 75 meters, and then drops down to 33.4 beyond. To anyone capable of doing second grade math, this obviously means it is a 3-shot kill at any range. And with a unfortunately painfully slow fire rate of 257 rounds per minute, that turns into a time to kill graph of 467 milliseconds. I have mentioned it in a pistol episode already, but to repeat myself here, this is the worst primary time to kill in the entire game. But yes, of course, the further you move out, the better it gets in comparison because it never increases. Although this argument will also appear futile in just a few minutes. Now, the only solution that can possibly turn this into a competitive weapon lies inside the headshot mechanics. So let's take a look at those now, shall we? Remember, the default multiplier is 1.5, so this line right here is without any ammo attachments. As you can see, it briefly lowers it for the first 21 meters with 1 headshot and then for the rest 2 will always be a kill. Arguably not a bad start, if we weren't using such a horrible weapon. What makes it somewhat competitive though is the identity-confused synthetic tip ammo. With this increase to a 1.75x multiplier, we can keep that drop up to 75 meters. And for those not really following what this means, if you land one headshot with this ammo type, below 75 meters, the next hit can just be a body shot and it will be a kill. Hitting 2 headshots is fairly unlikely, but hitting a combo of 1 headshot and 1 body shot, that's much more achievable. And that 2-round time to kill would actually come out at 233 milliseconds, which is also much more competitive, even close to overpowered you could say, if you consider the 75 meter range on that. But you do need a lot of skill or luck to even get there, and keep in mind, this still assumes you'd land every shot. But still, this mechanic does help on occasion. Otherwise I would just dish out the F tier right now and we could move on, but with this we can talk about it. Although we will keep that for later and focus on the loadouts now. As stated earlier, the accuracy on this weapon is a non-issue, even if you go into the debuffs with some of the grips. But what we do have to worry about is the recoil and the velocity. Let's talk about the velocity first, because that's a bit simpler. 800 meters per second might sound incredible at first, but it's actually not that great when you are trying to land headshots on moving targets out to 75 meters. So in order to make that less annoying, I always go for the extended barrel so we can reach those nice 1000 meters per second. It's still not hit scan with that, but it's much more comfortable than before. And now the recoil. DMRs obviously have a really punchy and abrupt recoil pattern. That means you can't really control it per se, it's more of a waiting for it to settle and slightly helping it to recenter a bit faster along the way type of thing. Problem is, the recoil on the M39 doesn't perfectly recenter in time for the second round. So if you want to place perfectly centered shots every single time, you would manually have to lower your maximum rate of fire, resulting in an even worse time to kill. Not something you would want to do. The problem is, and I tried it for 3 matches myself, so trust me on that, even with a full recoil setup, meaning 20-point break plus 35-point grip, you still do not reach that perfect recenter in time. So either you pull down very harshly and hope the jumpiness doesn't betray you, or you give it a bit more time and then you can comfortably hit your targets with every single shot, just slower than you would want to. On a somewhat positive note though, I do want to mention something else. Since these weapons are all designed for longer ranges, a suppressor isn't necessarily a requirement. But of course I will still say that a flash hider is. Especially on this one, because we want to focus on those 75 meters, and that is exactly the range the 3D spotting would take place in without one. So to summarize before we approach my setups. Hollow point ammo is basically a must. Accuracy attachments can thankfully be ignored. The extended barrel should be seen as a requirement. Reducing the recoil does help, but only ever so slightly, and if you are short on points, you can comfortably downgrade from the suppressors to the flash hider. With those basic notes, let's see what I came up with. Lighten suppressor to help with the recoil reset. You do not want to use the long one, because on DMRs the increased sway is actually an issue. Extended barrel for the velocity, folding stubby grip to somewhat help with the jumpiness and the ADS speed. And to repeat myself, the accuracy debuff does not matter. And then I like to go down to a 15 round magazine, because this gives me an even faster ADS speed. Also, 20 rounds are just unnecessary. 15 are more than enough, and at the ranges you use this thing, reloading is usually not an issue. Then hollow point ammo to make it at least competitive on accident, and for a sight I like to use the BF2M 2.5x. Now, there are a few ways you can personalize this, mostly by changing the grip. Obviously, if you don't care about the ADS speed as much as I do, you can leave it at 250. I wouldn't recommend going back to 300 though. So either you just ignore the ADS speed in the grip department, that would work by going down to the 10-point folding vertical, and then you can fiddle around with the 15 round fast mag and a mag catch on top for really quick reloads. Or if you don't care about the recoil reduction part, you can just use the slim hand stop instead, which will still keep your ADS speed low, and now you have 5 points you can spend on a 20 round fast mag. Or, if you do care about the recoil, at least slightly, but you also want to keep the ADS speed improvement, then you can use the 15-point adjustable angled grip. Same follow-up choice magazine-wise as before. And if you are someone that simply likes to plant his weapon down, you might even consider giving this PTT grip pod a try. No saving points there, but you get an integrated bipod. Personally, this basic setup right here is what worked best for me. Fast ADS speed, 15 rounds, normal reload. Never had an issue with it. That's not to say I had fun, just that it never bothered me. The second build is for those that really want or need more help with the recoil. By getting rid of the suppressor and downgrading it to the flash hider, then upgrading the grip to the classic vertical for 35 points, and if you pick the 15 round fast mag, you can even stay on the comfy 250 millisecond ADS speed. This setup can be spam fired a tiny bit more confidently, but the difference really isn't huge, and personally I prefer having the suppressor. But if you really want to use this weapon for whatever reason and the suppressor build from before didn't help you enough with the recoil, then you can at least give this a try. Last and least, a setup for people I usually strive to kill with the backblast of my RPG or by simply melting through their spine with my blowtorch. However, if you use this to counter-snipe that subhuman scum camping on those mountaintops with their sniper rifles, bipods and thermal scopes, then more power to you. Flash hider, because at the ranges this is built for, you won't even be on your enemy's minimap anyway. Extended barrel, duh. Rangefinder, just to make it even easier. Bipod, as I said, this is dangerously close to becoming scum yourself. 25 round mag, because ADS speed is irrelevant with a bipod playstyle and you want to look through that scope as long as possible without having to reload. Long range ammo, because we do not profit off of the hollow point mechanic at long ranges anyway, and this helps with the velocity and drop. And then I like to use the 10x scope with a switchable integrated 2x option for faster target acquisition. Again, let me add some personalization paths. Number 1, you do want a suppressor. Simplest way to go about that is to either get rid of the integrated zoom, that can get you the 20 point sub, or you downgrade the magazine, which can either open up the 20 point or even the 25 point option. Please note that there is no weapon sway with a deployed bipod at all, so on this build the long suppressor is fine. If you don't want to get rid of the integrated zoom nor the big magazine, you could also just remove the rangefinder. After all, you can just spot the target or ping the range and use the regular scope zeroing to adjust. And now I would usually talk about how you could afford the thermal scope, but since it's a blurry fucking mess on this weapon, I won't. Instead we will move right over to the ranking. To summarize this weapon, the only thing that makes it not shit is a mechanic that requires a lot of skill or an enormous amount of luck on a regular basis. The recoil is annoying at best and the time to kill is atrocious. It does have some undeniable upsides though, especially if you consider that it might get a buff in the future. Fingers crossed. You get a fairly big magazine for a weapon of this type, and even if you downgrade it to 15 rounds, it's more than you need, and that even improves the ADS speed too. The accuracy is also so good you can completely disregard any buffs or debuffs related to it, so you can actually use all of those grips you usually avoid, which can save you even more points. And because of all those interactions, getting the extended barrel, a suppressor and any sight you could really want on this thing while still having good ADS speed on top of that is actually pretty easily done. That is rather rare. The only problem currently is that even with all those amenities, the basic performance is just way too bad. If the M39 should ever receive a buff, we might be looking at a really comfortable pick, but as of today we simply aren't. Therefore the EMR will be placed in E tier. That might seem a little harsh right now, but in a few minutes this ranking will make even more sense, because next up we will analyze its brother from another mother. This is gonna be quick. The SVDM, for those that haven't noticed so far, is a full-on copy of the M39 that just shoots faster. The damage is the same, the BTK is therefore also the same, only the TTK is slightly faster with 400 milliseconds instead of 467. So it's an upgrade, but not a massive one. And if you're thinking, did they copy that headshot mechanic too? Yes, they did. Since we have the same damage model here and we also get access to the cross-dressing synthetic tip ammo, the next chapter will also look quite familiar. Just as before, we get a small drop in the first range with the default ammo and a 75 meter drop with the hollow points. And since 400 milliseconds are still not a great time to kill, you could argue that this is going to be a necessity again. So let's look at those builds. Light and sub, extended barrel, folding stubby for ADS speed, basic mag, hollow point ammo and the 2.5x sight. The obvious difference to the M39 is the magazine size. 10 rounds are much more what I'm used to for DMRs, and also means I will definitely not downgrade to the smaller one for the ADS speed improvement. 5 rounds are just unacceptable on a 3-shot kill weapon, but if you do mind the slow reload, you can switch to the adjustable angled grip or the slim hand stop and then at least afford the fast mag. Here we are on the full recoil build, also similar to the EMR. Flash hider instead of suppressor, extended barrel, stippled stubby grip, not classic vertical, so we can at least keep the 250 millisecond ADS time. Of course, if you don't care about that, you might as well go for the classic vertical. 10 round fast mag, hollow points, 2.5x sight. Again, I prefer the suppressor build, but this might work better for some people. Last and least, once more, the rotting carcass build. This is also pretty similar to the EMR, but since ADS speed doesn't matter and the big magazine is completely overpriced, we can actually afford this with a suppressor from the get-go. So, standard sub, extended barrel, rangefinder, bipod, 10 round fast mag, long range ammo, 10x combined with a 2x integrated zoom, and that's that. However, since this weapon actually has a usable thermal, you can downgrade to the regular magazine and then also afford that one. Pretty neat. So, what's the verdict? The SVDM is, just from a pure performance standpoint, better than the EMR in every way that matters. It kills faster, it has access to the exact same headshot mechanic, and the recoil is also less annoying. I'll just throw that comparison from sim.gg on the screen here for context. So the only downsides you might suffer from by picking this instead of the M39 would be the overall slower achievable ADS speed and the magazine size. That's literally it. I would argue both of those things are nice to have, sure, but for the ranges these weapons are made for, they aren't really a deal breaker. If those two things coincidentally are the only thing you care about, okay. But for literally everyone else, the SVDM is just a complete upgrade over the M39. But outside of that brotherly competition, how good is it really? Sure, it will be higher than E tier because it has to be in this context, but we are still talking about a 400 millisecond time to kill weapon that, even though it has lower recoil, is still not fully spammable and still annoying to handle. And you will continue to lose most fights below 50 meters against an equally skilled player with pretty much every other weapon. So yeah, it's still not great. I did play a few rounds of Breakthrough with it, which I normally never touch, and I could instantly tell it fit that game mode much better. You know the direction the enemies will be coming from at all times, so you can consciously pick your distance, you don't ever run into people if you play smart, and you actually have time to line up those headshots here and there. For those linear modes, I would probably even give it a B- or something in C tier, but my tier list is focused on Conquest and Escalation, and for those modes it will have to be satisfied with a D+. Not as bad as the EMR, but if it doesn't receive a buff someday, I will also never pick this up again on my own accord. And now we will talk about a gun that kind of surprised me. The LMR has, once again, a damage model that only becomes clear once you understand the headshots. 27.3 up to 21 meters and then 25 for infinity. That is a BTK line stuck on 4 and with a fire rate of 450 RPM, a time to kill of 400 milliseconds. So this kills just as fast as the SVDM, but you need to land one more shot. Not a great start, huh? Well, we will see. Quick reminder that this is the only DMR that still retains the basic 1.34x headshot multiplier. So the first three graphs look like this. You get a partial reduction with 2 headshots below 21 meters and then a full one with 3. Trash. With hollow point ammo, actual hollow point ammo this time, you get that full drop with 2 headshots already. And with synthetic tip ammo, you basically get the standard version but shifted. So a short reduction for 21 meters but with 1 headshot and then the full reduction with 2. The takeaway here is that basic headshots are unrewarding as hell and synthetic tip ammo only has a minuscule advantage over hollow point in those first 21 meters. A range you should desperately avoid with this weapon. Even if we assume you do land that 1 headshot with synthetic tip ammo inside of those 21 meters, the time to kill would only be reduced down to 267 milliseconds. That will still make you lose against pretty much everything else. And it not only assumes you will land that 1 headshot, it also assumes you land all of the rest. That ain't happening. Hence why I would argue, if you do want to do something about your headshot potential, hollow point ammo is the only reasonable pick here. It's on par with synthetic tip for all that matters, and it's cheaper. So let's see how we can integrate that into our builds. The LMR's recoil is noticeably less harsh and jumpy compared to the EMR and SVDM, so much so that you can actually full spam this weapon and still hit everything. However, having at least a recoil suppressor and one of the small grips makes that even more reliable and easygoing, so personally I would still go with this setup here. Light sub, long barrel, adjustable angled, 10 round fast mag, hollow points and BF2M. A few notes on this build if I may. The first thing to point out, and that is also the major crux of this weapon, are the magazines. For some reason the bigger one doesn't cost 15 but 20 points, so even if we would go down to the 10-point folding vertical grip, we couldn't afford it. The other options beyond that are obviously also way too expensive, but what's even more annoying about them is that the fast versions do not work at all. Dice? Thankfully, at least the fast 10-round version does. To be honest, this weapon felt better to me with the folding stubby that has a bit more recoil reduction than this adjustable angled grip, but having a 10-round magazine on a 4-shot kill weapon with a fucking 3-second reload is just mind-numbingly infuriating. I have been playing around with the reload speeds to figure out my own personal comfort limit, and I pretty much came to the conclusion that 2.5 seconds is my acceptable maximum. Anything longer and I start to get annoyed while using it. So even with this fast mag, this is still technically pissing me off. And even more so in this specific case because of the fire rate and the low ammo count in itself. Using it that way feels like you are spending more time reloading than actually shooting enemies. It is unbearably annoying, at least to me. And since I don't want to get rid of the grip entirely and I also don't want additional sway or losing the suppressor recoil reduction completely, there isn't really anything I can do about it. Using this grip and this fast magazine is the only solution, and it's still not even close to comfortable. The part where you are shooting with this setup is fine, the part where you aren't is not. And because we are entirely helpless in a budget department here, let's talk about another build option. This looks pretty similar to what we just had, but there is one key difference: no hollow point ammo. So here we are completely giving in to the base performance, but at least we can afford a much more comfortable setup in return. Lights up, extended barrel, folding stubby, 15-round magazine, standard ammo, 2.5x sight. As boring as this sounds, this has become my preferred setup, just because of the bigger magazine. And once they fix the fast version, I would actually downgrade this to a folding vertical grip, pick the 15-round fast option, and then even add the mag catch on top of that. That way I could keep the recoil reduction, move below that 2.5 second ceiling, and still have an acceptable ADS speed of 250 milliseconds. But that's not possible right now, so this is it. The feeling of decades being stripped off of my life expectancy whenever I need to reload is still there, but at least now I can shoot for a bit longer in between those torture sessions. The only further thing you could do is using the flash hider, downgrade to the adjustable angled grip, and then afford a 20-round mag, which is just ridiculously expensive. Not a change I would make for that reason, but the option is there. And before we move on to the ranking, I have another little treat for my Swedish viewers. Since the LMR is a bullpup, you are allowed to reload while aiming. And because I constantly forget that this is even a thing, I almost missed out on this bug. When you use a variable scope, you will get the hip-fire reload animation, although you are still technically ADS'd, which means I can still switch between the zoom levels while this is happening. And that looks even dumber on the other options with more zoom levels. And to confirm for the devs, yes, this is a thing on all bullpups, so put that on the to-do list as well. Thanks. All in all, this didn't sound too bad though, right? Let's see where this takes us. The LMR has an obvious and massive magazine issue, both in size and speed. But with 15 rounds it becomes at least somewhat acceptable, and if you really stick to its preferred distances, even a 3-second reload can be tolerated, I guess. Just not by me. Apart from that, the base time to kill isn't great, but since you can actually spam fire this thing without suffering from too much wobble, it's not that much of an issue. And of course, you still lose in a lower mid-range and close range to pretty much everything else, just like the two weapons before this one. But for what it does beyond that, this at least felt more comfortable to use. So contradicting to my own initial impression and probably surprising to my fellow Discord mammals, I actually came to enjoy using this weapon. Something the EMR never achieved, and the SVDM only occasionally whenever I hit that headshot combo, which wasn't very often. So in comparison, this was a lot more fun. If they would fix the magazines, reduce the reload times overall, and maybe even lower their cost, I wouldn't actually mind picking this up from time to time, especially on maps like Firestorm, Mirak Valley or Eastwood. I will probably still prefer full auto options, but those definitely lack the long range capabilities in comparison. So in my opinion it does have its own spot in a balance, it just needs better magazines. That's it. Of course I wouldn't mind a 21 meter free shot range being added, but I don't think it's necessary. Just make it less annoying to use. Give me quick reloads and cheaper, bigger magazines, and that's all I ask of you. So, final judgment for its current state, C tier. And now, the queen of the DMRs. The SVK was in my top 3 weapons in Battlefield 2042 and it is trying really hard to get there again in this game. But it has changed quite a bit, so first we will have to see if that was for the better or worse. Damage wise it still hits like a truck. 66.7 up to 9 meters, then 59.9 up to 21 meters, no I do not know why it's not a flat 60, no clue, and then 50 points of damage beyond. For the second graders still watching, yes, you'll all get a star in your folders. This is a 2-shot BTK across the entire map, and with a fire rate of 150 RPM, that comes out as a time to kill of 400 milliseconds. Sounds familiar. Let's see what the headshots do. We are back to 1.5x, and as you can see, because it's a 2-shot weapon anyway, there obviously isn't much going on. We do have a drop for the first 9 meters, so in that range a headshot is a 1-shot, and with the bipolar synthetic tip ammo we can extend that to 21 meters. I will show you a build that makes use of that, but personally I don't think it's that reasonable. The ADS speed on this thing is atrocious, and you shouldn't get into a distance of 21 meters to an enemy with this weapon in the first place. But okay, let's see how it works out. Hollow point ammo for that 21 meter one-shot potential, lights up, because why not, extended barrel for obvious reasons, slim hand stop so that god-awful ADS speed can even somewhat reach near acceptable status, and then a fast mag and a sight of preference. So why would I not use this? Well, because the ADS speed is this horrible, quickscoping isn't a thing. That means to make use of that one-shot potential you would have to be aiming already and then hit an enemy that appears within 21 meters of you to the noggin. If that sounds like a likely scenario to you, have fun with this build. For the normal people, let's take a look at my main setup now. Lightens up, extended barrel, full angled, fast mag, long range ammo to reduce drop, and a 2.5x scope. There isn't a lot to personalize here. Using a better recoil grip won't do much, you just have to let it settle. It's almost a perfect timing anyway. The only thing you might want to change is the scope. And as always, that's a completely personal choice anyway. But if you do want to get access to all options, you can just downgrade to a 20-point suppressor and a folding stubby, and then you can afford all variables and even the thermals. And now I have that one last build for the counter snipers again. 20 point sub, extended barrel, rangefinder, bipod, fast mag, long range ammo, and a 10x scope with a 2x integrated option. The only change you could make here is going with the default mag and then trying the 6x thermal scope. Nothing else is really worth changing in my opinion. So, how much do I like it? The SVK has received a considerable long-range buff in comparison to the last game. But because of the fire rate reduction, it has also suffered in the close and mid-range. For my playstyle, that is a clear downgrade. I usually don't ever engage anything past 60 meters, and when I do, I just use the environment to move up or avoid the encounter entirely by just going a different route. So while this does do wonders at range, it's not quite for me. From a neutral perspective though, judging this weapon by what it obviously wants to do, it completely nails every expectation you could have. And since you don't have scope glint on this thing either, it is quite possibly the most potent counter snipe option there ever was. Although I wouldn't mind a few more magazine options and maybe at least a 1-step buff to the ADS speed. You can keep the fire rate and the damage as it is, I can accept that this is just not for me. But from a general perspective, I think the SVK easily deserves a spot in A tier. Not necessarily the easiest weapon to use, and at the most common distances of this game certainly not great, but if you lean into its capabilities, you will soon understand why it's so high up on my list. Some final words on the entire DMR class to close out. The P-Shooter LMR needs more, cheaper and faster ammo. The free shot options both need less recoil, the EMR specifically needs some form of a base level stat buff, and the SVK would be happy about some minor upgrades to the ADS speed and magazine variety, but it wouldn't mind not getting those either. So all in all, I think only 2 of these 4 options were fun, which is not necessarily a great quote. And the fun I did have with those 2 options was either somewhat breaking my playstyle or just not quite as fun as the other weapon different categories. Meaning, if it were up to me, this entire weapon class would receive a slight buff across the board, because it's not like I hate DMRs. As I said, the SVK used to be my top 3 in 2042 as well, and in Battlefield 5 the Gewehr 43, AGM and M1 Garand were among my favorites. With my playstyle, that is. But maybe that specific type of DMR just hasn't found its way into Battlefield 6 yet. We will see if Season 2 will do anything about that. And that's it for today. If you have been watching for this long, I would appreciate a like, and if you aren't a subscriber yet, I invite you to become one. Thank you for your time, and I will see you on a battlefield. Sorrow out.